medically understood.
Hey there, folks. Mark Edwards here with the Reasoning Aloud YouTube channel and podcast. Fascism is a weird, kind of interesting, and uniquely horrible thing that human beings have developed. There's a lot of disagreement over what it is, what movement should be called fascist, what movement should not be called fascist, how to defeat fascism, how to fight it, how to interact with it, whether we should interact with it in any way other than just smashing it. And that's what we're going to talk about today. In today's interview, I have the wonderful Richard Hannay on my show. He is a history graduate. He's studied Greek military history, and he is also an expert on the Golden Dawn Party, which was an overtly fascist, actually neo-Nazi party that rose to power in Greece from the late 90s to the mid-2010s, where it captured a not insubstantial amount of the parliamentary seats in Greece and was ultimately only brought down because of a failure of optics, basically. It's a fascinating conversation. We talk first about what fascism is, what it is not, how it differs from other right-wing authoritarian movements, and then we discuss the history of the Golden Dawn Party, and then we try to extrapolate from that lessons that we can use to identify other fascist movements as they take place and rise around the world, how we can best guard ourselves against those threats in the future, and maybe how to convince our liberal friends that there is actually a fascism happening when it is happening. I really enjoyed this interview, and not just because Richard was kind enough to do this one with me twice. The first time that we recorded this interview about a month ago, my computer ate the file, and this interview that you're about to watch is actually the second version of this. I think it's a little better. I think it's a little more streamlined. We sort of honed our talking points and we really got down to business and condensed a lot of the information in a more listenable way. But I just want to thank Richard, or George is the name he goes by. He goes by Richard Hannay on Twitter. I just want to thank you, George, once again for coming back on the show a second time. And we are going to have him back on again in the future to discuss Greek military history and the Greek Civil War. So he's definitely a friend of the program, and I encourage you to check him out and follow him on Twitter. If you want to support this show, you can do so by joining our Patreon, and you can be one of the wonderful people whose name is going to appear on screen now. And in addition to having your name on screen, you get my endless love, support, and affection. And maybe some other stuff when I figure out what the best way to reward you wonderful folks for giving me some money for no discernible reason is. But I'm not going to waste any more of your time with this introduction. We are here to talk about fascism and all the ways that it is bad and just super not cool. So let's get to it. George, thank you so much for coming back on the show and doing this again with me. I really, really appreciate it. Um,
It's a
so,
pleasure.
yeah, thank you. So tell us real quick just a little bit about who you are and how you came to uh, have the knowledge that you do about this subject before we start getting into it proper. Just kind of introduce yourself a little bit for the audience.
All right. So my name is George. I go by Richard Hannay on Twitter. And I'd say most of my knowledge about fascism, right-wing authoritarianism, and regimes like that come from my history studies. Now, lately, I got my degree. Now I have a bachelor's degree in military history. So
Congratulations.
I'd say I am, to some extent, I am qualified in explaining these kinds of subjects. And of course, when it comes to say Golden Dawn, it was mostly like a project of mine. I really found it interesting, so I just kind of decided to uh, get into it, do some research, and because it's a topic that BreadTube hasn't really breached because it's kind of outside of its purview, I decided, hey, maybe it'll be interesting to talk with some BreadTubers about it, because I'm pretty sure they probably don't know how interesting a topic it is, and you can how much you can take away from it as a lefty.
Yeah, I was passingly familiar with it just because I have personal connections to Greece. So I kind of learned about it just through sort of osmosis through my personal associations, but I was not aware of the extent of what happened there by any means. So just in
Yeah.
brief, the Golden Dawn Party was, or would it be fair to say still is it still active? Uh,
I mean, there's definitely still active members. It is considered a criminal organization,
okay,
but that doesn't mean it goes away. It's still, even like even in the last election in 2019, they got 2.9% of the vote.
okay,
So they are gone as a political force, but there's still Golden Dawn members around, and there are some other fringe parties that have claimed a lot of their voters, though the lion's share has gone to New Democracy. But yeah, I'd say it was,
okay.
because as a political threat, it is not as prominent as it was.
Okay. All right. So the good, then we'll use past tense then. And I like that. That's good. We like that it's a past tense.
Sure.
Um so the Golden Dawn Party was a openly fascist, actually even neo-Nazi, even political party
Oh,
that
neo-Nazi, yeah.
yeah, that rose to a fairly alarming amount of political power in Greece over the past 10, 12, 15 years or so. And that's what we're gonna spend our time talking about, that journey of how they went from just this small little street cabal of thugs to having a sizable amount of the votes in parliament. But I thought that it would be instructive and helpful for people to just do a brief overview of just kind of what fascism is, because we use that word a lot. It's an insult now, like people throw it around as a pejorative. And it's something very difficult to define. I spent the hour before this interview rereading Umberto Eco's essay, Fascism, and I've got some notes from that actually pulled up on the screen, but I thought um, maybe we could just, or I'll let you talk for a good little bit about just what it is that sort of defines fascism, and we can explore that and then go over the Golden Dawn Party.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I think there's real value in kind of differentiating simple right-wing authoritarianism from fascism, because fascism, I'd say, even though there's no real concrete ideology, it's more a set of ideas. It there aren't writings of like fascist thinkers that you could say, yes, this is what we consider fascism. There's a lot of divergence between fascist groups, but some things that I like to use to define fascism is like, first and foremost, there's ultranationalism. There is a found like a foundation myth of the country, or like the idea that we were once great as a nation, and now we have fallen apart, and our great nation is being destroyed by X group, and this group has to be removed in some fashion so that the nation can reclaim its glory. So that's what makes, for example, Make America Great Again a fascist slogan, because you would ask, okay, when was America great? How can we define the greatness of a country? That is a very nationalistic concept. The idea of like the greatest, we are the greatest country. So there's nationalism, there is so ultranationalism, the myth of like of once great now destroyed. Um, there is also usually chauvinism in not only against weaker countries and the global south, but also chauvinism, as in like men are more important than women. Women are there's very traditional, ultra traditionalism in gender roles and uh, and the way society functions. There is more. It is more collectivist, as in the group is more important than the individual. This doesn't necessarily mean that it's similar to, say, collectivism in the more left-wing sense. It's more in the idea of like breaking down expression and individualism in the service of the state. So that is also a part of fascism, and I would say also racism is pretty much baked in because of chauvinism and ultranationalism. So those, I would say, are some of the most important parts. Now, authoritarianism is usually goes hand in hand with those, but you don't necessarily need any single one. You need, I'd say, a majority of those aspects,
Right.
because and authoritarianism is usually hard to define, because you'll see a person and you say, okay, this person is an authoritarian, but then you get the counter argument, well, he's not a dictator. Or, well, yeah, he's not a dictator, but he's an authoritarian. He's a person that, if given the chance, they would be a dictator. That's what I like to ask my more liberal friends when I talk about Trump. I like I'll call him a fascist and an authoritarian, and the response is, well, he isn't a dictator. He never had dictatorial powers. How can you call him an authoritarian? Well, you can ask this very important question. You can ask, okay, if let's say he was given the chance to be the king of America, absolute monarch, top power, the like, let's say he was given the opportunity to be a dictator, would he take it?
Hmm.
And that, I think, that's how you define an authoritarian. Not only in a person that believes in the ultimate authority of one individual over or the power of the state over the individual, but also a person that, say, if they are the fascist leader we're talking about, the question to ask is, if given the opportunity to be a dictator, would they take that opportunity?
Right.
And, and I'd say the question for Trump is unequivocally he would. He's an absolute narcissist. He thought if he could be king, he would have been king.
Right.
Uh, that's how I like to define it.
Yeah. The
Yeah.
one of the elements, and we're kind of just going down the list here, but for one of the big elements of fascism for me, is the cult of action for action's sake. Just to
Yes.
There's this idea that
True.
you just have to constantly be doing, and usually that doing is violence, towards an otherized group of people who are somehow both weaker than you, because they're pathetic, but also strong enough that they've kept you in subjugation and humiliated you and contributed to this mythos that you've created of persecution for yourself.
Yes.
Combined with like a pseudo populism where you only lionize the presumed will of a small segment of your population. But what's
Mhm.
really important about fascism is all the things that we've talked about. You don't have to have all of them to be a fascist system.
Yes.
Fascism is intrinsically uh, incoherent, and it can have one or two or three or any of these qualities and still be recognizably fascist. If you compare, uh,
I would also say
mhm,
that apart from the things that you added that I really agree with, there's also social Darwinism That's
Yes.
also often the strong will survive, the weak must suffer, will suffer what they must. That's also an aspect of fascist regimes, and especially those that are extremely racist, like
Yeah.
say Italy or Nazi Germany. Social Darwinism is often very important.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, just once again, if you were to compare all of the what we would recognizably think of as fascist governments in the history of the world, Mussolini, the Franco, Nazi Germany, I can't remember the guy's name from Chile
Imperial
right now.
Japan.
Yeah, but like all of these regimes are instantly recognizable as fascist, but if you compare them to one another, they're very different from one another. And that just,
Absolutely.
yeah, that
Yeah.
just speaks to the inherent contradiction of fascism. For instance, in Mussolini's tenure, he started out as an overt atheist, and by the end of his regime, he was lionizing himself as the chosen one of the Christian church. Like, there doesn't have to be coherence, and at times it seems almost intentionally incoherent. And that's just that's part and
Yeah.
parcel of the package, and it's one of the things that I think makes it so difficult for people who are not actively trying to understand it. It it makes it hard for people to grasp onto what this thing is because it is so incoherent by almost by design.
Yeah. I would totally agree. It is difficult to point it out, and a lot of its strength lies in that because really, populism, as you said, is really important to the development of a fascist movement, and because um, because it's so hard to define, they can hide behind the hard definition. So they can say, no, we aren't a fascist movement. We're just a nationalist movement, or we just care for the well-being of our country and nation. We care about the poor. We care about whatever. They can really say whatever.
Hmm.
And the problem is that the cult of action is really useful to them as the populism and the cult of action helps a lot when there's the time of economic crisis. So if like you have an economic crisis, fascist movements grow very quickly because not only do they sell a populist message, but they also tell you that we can do something about it. We can do this. We can. You can immediately. So there is something to do.
Hmm.
Um, because more technocratic movements won't necessarily react like this. They will think about their actions way more. But sadly, fascism is able to not only hide but also grow very easily at times of turmoil.
Yeah, and I think that's one thing that makes it people who are, as you said, in times of economic and political strife, people who feel powerless uh, are often swayed by fascist rhetoric because it has a prescription for action. It doesn't, real solutions are often complicated and they require nuance
Yeah.
and systematizing things and long-term planning. And these things are not palatable to people who are hungry. People who are hungry want to
Nope.
eat. And if somebody comes along waving, a flag that says blood and soil and hands you a steak, you might start listening to that person. And obviously, we don't want to like give too much of a leeway to the economic insecurity theory, but it certainly plays a role. It makes people more vulnerable. Um, Fascist systems tend not to arise when things are going well.
That's true. And of course, it's not just economic, because if you see, for example, a breakdown of the Capitol rioters and their demographics, they were fairly well off
Hmm.
in general. So conspiracism and racism can play a really big part in growing such movements. So where there's ignorance of otherness, there can be fascism. That is, it's fairly easy. Integrated communities that are cosmopolitan and people live generally well with each other, those communities have a very hard time catching on to a fascist movement. What? No, no, wait. Fascist movements have a really hard time recruiting in places like this,
Right.
because when you live, when your neighbor is of a different ethnicity, and you really enjoy spending your time barbecuing with them, it's
Right.
really hard for you to start like hating this person for destroying your civilization or whatever the fuck some fascist
Right.
is talking about.
Yeah, that's actually been a theme in a lot of the conversations that I've had recently is the degree to which um closeness with people that are unlike yourself is beneficial to just the lifeblood of your culture, right? Being next to, spending time with people who don't look or think like you. Cosmopolitanism is just, there's no such thing as a panacea, but it damn sure seems close. Like, cosmopolitanism seems like it
Yeah.
might be a pretty good, it has problems, but it really does get to the root of a lot of our baser urges and like our more um, violent tendencies.
Honestly, having lived in a cosmopolitan environments, it is unbelievable how much insight and love of other cultures you can gain just by living around different people, and how much like your biases can melt away. And it is often extremely stark to me when I come back to, say, Greece. And even though in many places of Greece it is a little cosmopolitan, like say the center of Athens, if I go off to a village
Mm-hmm.
or meet some older people, they will speak to me like they'll most of them will probably be Islamophobic. If I speak to them, they'll talk to me. They will describe Muslims to me, and I will, having lived
Mm,
with Muslim roommates and having
right.
had friends that are Muslim, I say, well, you're way off. Whatever you think, like you're so way off.
Yeah.
And I know that if these people got to meet a few Muslims, they would probably feel a little bit at ease about it. Like, if of course they weren't just overtly offensive from the beginning.
Yeah.
But like if they held their tongue and just kind of got to meet a few people, and they realized, well, oh shit, they're people like us.
Right.
They're not just they're not interested in world conquest, so we can just cool with
Yeah.
that a bit.
And I think that it is so inoculating to the worst parts of ourselves is probably one of the reasons that fascism is so deeply allergic to cosmopolitanism. And it pretty much tries
Oh
to
yeah,
snuff it out wherever it can find it. And for instance, strict immigration laws, on the most lenient side, all the way up to just straight up ethnic cleansing at the other extreme end. But it will do what it can to root it out. So I think that's as coherent of a definition of fascism as we're going to get because it is just so incoherent of an ideology. I will encourage anybody who's
yeah.
watching. I'm going to link it in the show notes, but just go read Umberto Eco's essay on the subject. It's 10 pages. It really covers a lot of ground in a very short amount of text. It's absolutely worth reading. Um, I would even go so far as to say just pause this and read it and then come back because it'll be very instructive to what we're going to talk about now, which is the history of the Golden Dawn Party. And I'm just going to let you run with that from start to finish because you are the expert here. Uh,
I mean, I hope to do it justice every time I talk about it, because it is a truly massive topic, and when you misinformation about it, it's difficult to uh, it's difficult to justify talking about it. But at the end, I think it's like maybe like a mistake or two that I might make. I think get trumped by the importance of this topic in not only understanding the growth of like a Nazi movement in like the modern day in a modern democracy, like,
Right.
but also understanding what we can do about it, and and basically what strategies we can use to kind of slow them down
Yeah,
when
absolutely.
they come back, because they will. They
Yeah,
always come back.
I mean, I think this is probably the history of this movement is probably one of the more important things to pay attention to in like modern politics over the past 20 years or so. It's hugely instructive, and it's worth spending the time to understand what happened here. So, go ahead and just kind of set the scene for us. So, when the Golden Dawn Party is like, what year is it? When they're just getting off the ground? What's going on? Like, what's the mood like? Just set the stage for us.
Yeah. So they started out in the early 1980s, and the group, it was founded as an explicit neo-Nazi group, uh, led by a former army commando who was a youth organizer for the military junta, which was a fascist military regime that ruled Greece between 1967 and 1974. So in the 1980s, this guy, Nikolaos Michaloliakos, gathers a group of acquaintances and friends, and launches this explicitly neo-Nazi organization. And we know it's neo-Nazi because they had the courtesy of taking a lot of photos of their meetings, um, and um, you can they had swastika clad walls, lots of podiums with swastikas. They were selling Mein Kampf in their meetings. They were passing new recruits through indoctrination sessions called pirines, where they would teach them and pass them through a rigorous lessons in anti-Semitism, uh, you know, rhetoric, and just very, just basically we're teaching them to be Nazis in an effective way. They were also paganistic to a certain extent. They really liked the Dodecatheon, which is the 12 gods uh, of basically Greek uh, mythology, and the it was the ancient Greeks used to believe. Um, so they liked the occult, they liked paganism, they were extremely racist and anti-Semitic, and they often talked about how they also idolized a lot of Greek fascist movements of the past. Mainly, they really loved the military junta
Hmm.
that had ruled Greece between 67 74. And they also really liked this figure of Ioannis Metaxas, who was a dictator between 1936 and 1941, when he died. And afterwards, Greece was conquered by the Axis. Um, they really like Metaxas because basically he was his brand of fascism was extremely similar to Mussolini's. Um, they had Roman salutes, they had double-headed axes. They spoke about these core tenets of family. Um, uh, yeah, patris thriskiae οικογένεια, which is fatherland, family, no, fatherland, religion, and family. So those were the core tenets of the Metaxist dictatorship, and it would be a core tenet of fascist movements ever since in Greece. Very similar to you know other fascist movements from abroad. So yeah, this group was just basically a neo-Nazi gang that, as it started in the 80s, and they also had a magazine called the Golden Dawn magazine, and they would write columns about how Rudolf Hess is an immortal an immortal martyr. He was, I think, dying at the time, Rudolf Hess. Um,
Refresh my memory. Who
they
is Rudolf
wrote
Hess? Uh,
Rudolf Hess was Hitler's number two guy. He was extremely important in Hitler's Germany, but he something went wrong. Um, I don't know how he thought this would go, but he flew a plane on his own initiative to the United Kingdom and decided to try and talk to British authorities and try to get them to, I think, either sign peace or side with the Axis, something like this. But of course, the British authorities just kind of captured him
mhm.
once he landed and sent him to prison. And I think he yeah, I think he was imprisoned in
Mm.
later in Spandau
Okay.
prison in
Right.
Germany, I think.
Okay.
I'm not
Yeah.
a thousand,
Interesting.
I'm not 100%, but he was a Nazi figure that stayed alive up until the 80s. And Golden Dawn magazine like
Mhm.
made headlines, Rudolf Hess dies, and an immortal like hero
Okay.
passes along.
All right. Gotcha.
Um, they, yeah, they were their publication was all explicitly neo-Nazi, extremely anti-Semitic, but they wanted really to start growing as an organization, and their first enemy, as they saw it, were leftists in the form of syndicalists and generally like left-wing students. So they and anti-fascists, of course. So they decided this was in the 90s. They decided to start basically organizing gangs that would find and beat leftists. And leftist groups had pretty much like found Golden Dawn from a pretty early time, so they were familiar with them, and there was often street violence between Golden Dawn members and leftist
Mm.
groups, anti-fascists. There
And
was also an attempted murder in the 90s, the Periandros case, where uh, a student was beaten and left for dead, but he survived. Um, but yeah, I'd say that this stage is about where the Proud Boys are
mhm.
right now,
Right.
like a large street gang basically that has its own value system and a way of indoctrination. Although this is way more explicitly neo-Nazi,
Right.
and there isn't as much media scrutiny at this time to put a nail in the coffin of their popularity and stifle their growth. At
Right.
this time, they can just freely recruit, basically.
And so we're into the 90s now, and they so
Yeah.
so we started in the 80s, being founded by this guy who was formerly part of the junta that had been the dictatorial power in Greece up until 74. Um, and now we're into the
Mm.
90s where they're having gang brawls with leftists and anti-fascists generally. What do the numbers look like between the 80s and the 90s? Like, how much have we grown? Where's their size at?
Um, I think they're into the low thousands
Okay.
at this time. The movement wasn't very large. They weren't a political party yet. I think they got into organizing for political power into the 2000s. But at this point, they're into the high hundreds, low thousands as a street gang, which is pretty large for a like street organization, especially in Greece.
Mm-hmm.
because I'd like keeping in mind that Greece is about the population of Ohio, right?
Right, right.
Um, and yeah, and the Athens is as a major city has only a few thousand police officers. Uh, I think under 20,000 police officers, maybe I don't know 15,000, something like that. So when you have a violent street gang with just like a few thousand members, that's
Yeah.
pretty large
What
as it is.
like what would you say? Because I remember I was there in the early 2000s, and it seemed like there was a fairly low population density for a city the size that it was. Like it's pretty it's a big city, but like it's not that densely populated outside of the immediate center. So a few thousand people is quite a bit. Are they at this point are they
Yeah,
operating
no,
primarily in Athens, or are they also in like Saloniki or elsewhere?
I think at this time they were mostly in Thessaloniki. In Athens, I don't think they had a lot of big. The group really started growing in the 2000s, but at this time they were mostly in Athens, and they remained mostly in Athens for the majority of their time. They liked to occupy certain neighborhoods that were more right wing and nationalistic. Um, See, that's the thing. Like a lot of neighborhoods in Athens, we know whether they're left wing or right wing, based a lot of on their demographics and how these countries. And it's not like a white black thing, as it tends to be in the United States. It's more of like which um, which neighborhoods have immigrant populations, which neighborhoods have police stations, which neighborhoods have like have been historic neighborhoods where left movements have grown. So, for example, like very famously Nea Ionia, which is a quarter where a lot of immigrants came after the Microasiatic disaster of like 1922, the Greco-Turkish War. That neighborhood is left wing. Exarchia houses basically the Greek anti-fascist movement. It's its core, and it is a very militantly left-wing neighborhood. Um, there's certain islands that are ostensibly left wing. Lesbos, for example, always votes for the Communist Party. They have it as their top, which is pretty interesting considering that the Communist Party only gets around 5% of the vote any given year, and it always wins in Lesbos and Ikaria. Um, but there's a lot of division between neighborhoods, but there's also right wing neighborhoods, like where the former military officers stay, where there's certain police departments where older people live, where richer people live.
Mm-hmm.
Those neighborhoods tend to be more right wing. And one right wing neighborhood that had a lot of refugees was Agios Panteleimonas, and a lot of and Golden Dawn really liked to organize there, and they had even painted some like fascist slogan in the on the ground in the middle of the square, and I think it stayed there for years.
Okay.
And they really had a grip on Agios Panteleimonas. Actually, I think before we like move into like how they were organizing, I think it's also important if I could show you some pictures
Sure.
of the uh, yeah, I think you'd find interesting of the groups.
Yeah, just
So
send them to me in the Twitter DM, and I'll put them on screen.
yeah, yeah. So the leader of the movement in front of a swastika. Oh, yeah, I think that's a pretty nice summary of them. Right. Here you go. That's a grouping of pictures collected from early Golden Dawn meetings, where you can see the main leader of the movement, and others, and
Okay.
you can really see they are
Yeah.
Nazis. There's really
Yeah.
no other way of putting it.
Yeah.
Um,
I've got this up on screen
as
now,
yeah,
and yeah, it's very clearly like in front of a swastika doing the Roman salute. You've got the eagles and the um, I guess that's wheat. That's very common. Yeah, no, I mean it's very, very obviously and explicitly a Nazi organization, not just
yeah,
a right wing organization, but an explicitly neo-Nazi. So,
yeah.
um,
I
and that's
mean,
important to keep in mind.
yeah, yes, there's other. This is, for example, something written on a stone wall by neo Nazis, which it's in Greek, but it says, "We want our homeland back." Talking about, of course, immigrants. And yeah, remember that guy Nazi saluting,
Mm-hmm.
uh, right? The one on the top left, I think, of the image is the leader,
Okay.
the main leader of Golden Dawn,
And
and he remained as such. Let me find him in front of a crowd. Uh,
that's
Rally.
Mihaloyakos. Did I say that correctly?
Yeah,
Mihaloyakos.
yeah. Kalaliakos, yes.
Yeah,
Um, and,
my
and
yeah is not so great, but and the lambda has never been good. I tried to learn Greek
yeah,
once and
it's
it was not, my throat just can't do it. Michaloiakos, is that close?
yeah,
Yeah.
that's pretty
Okay.
close,
Well,
I'd say. So, oh wait, oh yeah, I'm finding this a bit on the fly, but I think they're really important and interesting in seeing exactly what what the Golden Dawn rallies looked like, and honestly, like, it's about as close as you can get to to a an explicitly like Nazi march.
yeah, I mean this
Lots of
is
flags. Lots of,
yeah, this is just
yeah. So like,
explicitly a
yeah, this, for example, this is also like pictures from
so
a rally
for the
in.
people listening to the podcast, it's basically Greek Hitler is what this looks like. We're not being
Yeah,
hyperbolic. It really is pretty much exactly as we're describing it. There's no embellishment here. I know sometimes I like to be a little hyperbolic, but this is just straight
it's
up.
explicit.
It's a,
It's explicit. Yeah,
um, okay. So
there's really no other way of putting it.
yeah. So okay.
Yeah, there, of course, the very large rallies started in the late 2000s, not in the late 2000s, late 2000s, beginning of the 2010s. But at this time, they're basically just violent street gangs that kind of take over and hold on to neighborhoods. Uh, but they, because of the leaders' interest in holding public office, they started organizing with other right wing like groups and small parties. Their growth was pretty slow in the early 2000s, and in 2005, I think a nihilistic anarchist organization bombed their offices, and that kind of left Golden Dawn out of operation for around uh, 2 years. But from 2007 onwards, I think the real growth begins. They start recruiting more people. The crisis hits in the 2008 2009. The economic crisis hits, and the Greek economy is devastated. Um, I think in 2007 the Greek GDP was at 350 billion a year, and it fell to 200 billion.
Yeah.
So, you know, losing 30-35% of your economy, just like that. Unemployment skyrocketed to the 20s,
Mm-hmm.
20% and over. And suddenly lots of unemployed people were found, found no purpose, joined the organization. They decided to start uh, blood drives and food donations for Greeks only, meaning whites only, because they weren't really checking IDs. They were just checking the color of your skin. When if you were an Afro Greek, they wouldn't really serve you, even though you had a Greek citizenship. They were very much like a white Greeks only uh, organization. Um, they So this garnered them a lot of popularity, and they also instructed their members to not harass immigrants and turn up anti-immigrant rhetoric. Um, and they they also pursued a very close relationship with the Greek police. They When the police often needed to do some like dirty work and like say clearing a neighborhood of refugees or like illegal immigrants, they would send like in Golden Dawn to like kind of um, keep their hands clean
Mm-hmm.
of like violent action. They even coordinated in some protests with Golden Dawn. So the real meteoric rise comes between 2007 and 2011,
Mm-hmm.
and 2012 it pays off in the elections. Um, so in this time, the violence starts escalating all around Athens. Certain The anti-fascists are ringing all the alarms that exist, like watch out, they're growing in number. There's a lot
Mm-hmm.
of them. There were really the anarchists and the anti-fascists were really at this time the and nihilistic anarchists, which are the terror groups. These are the only people really fighting Golden Dawn at this time. Uh, the police really are pretty friendly towards them. Uh, the army is just nowhere to be seen. Of course, there were some armed forces members that did identify with Golden Dawn. They hadn't made it into parliament yet, but we would see like the beginnings of it because they after getting in 2009 they got only 0.3% of the vote,
Mm-hmm.
0.3%. In 2010, in the European Parliament elections, they got 5.4%, only in 1 year,
Uh,
which
uh,
is really major.
yeah, that's
Um,
a huge spike of growth. I
Huge jump.
wonder if we could spend a little bit more time on this period where they have sort of a tacit or I don't know how tacit it was. It could have been explicit or overt, but this relationship that they had with the police and as how did that grow and like what more the details of that, because that seems um like something that is
Yes.
prone to happen with these sorts of movements elsewhere in the world.
Yeah. So there is i- when it comes to police forces in Greece, sadly, as political back in the 30s and 40s, as political organizations like rose to power, they would often make sure that the police and military were staffed with loyalists, uh, so that like military coups could be avoided, and or dictatorial power could be held onto. And this was no different in later times. And really, the modern Greek police force is very strongly based on the police apparatus of the military junta. Lots of commanders and high-ranking members have some vague ties to the junta, and even though there were some tries to eliminate the overt anti-communism, because that was the main ideology of the Greek police, was anti-communism. To eliminate the anti-communism, the Greek police, that never really caught on. Police were often extremely conservative and right-wing, and they were concerned, like pieces of media talking about radicalism in the higher echelons of the Greek police for a fairly long time. They were often and still are hostile to immigrants, leftists who protest quite a bit in Greece.
Mm-hmm.
Protests and riots are often between left-wing groups and the police. So that meant that they were really hostile to lefties. So when the Golden Dawn came around and was fighting them and was real friendly to the police, they were coordinating with them, helping them out in in fighting leftists and harassing immigrants. Well, no reason to deny some help.
Yeah.
I have put down some notes about coordination with the police, and I do mention here like some strong anti-communist ties with the Greek police. So yeah, they did anti-immigrant work, and because Golden Dawn would organize pogroms in neighborhoods that had a lot of immigrants, and they would smash up shops. They would harass homeless immigrants and refugees. They would um, they would attack, beat, stab people of color where they found them, and the Greek police was often there way too late to respond to such violence.
And those neighborhoods, as you said earlier, were predominantly left-wing anyway, who were sort of natural enemies of the police. So it's sort of so with the police being largely a right-wing organization, they who are at odds with leftist and somewhat more cosmopolitan influences, the Golden Dawn just sort of found a natural allyship with the police force, just through, not even probably, like, would you say it was, I mean, almost certainly at some level it was intentional, but it sounds like there was just a natural allyship born of, like, almost shared concerns.
On the side of the Golden Dawn, like, seeking friendship with the police was very deliberate. They didn't just they encouraged members to join the police force. They were really interested in becoming friendly with the police, and this kind of like mutual respect escalated in when like there were certain like huge protests between 2009 and 2011, and the Golden Dawn would often coordinate with police. The police would often, if they arrested leftists, they would often threaten them with doxing. They'd say, "I will dox you to the Golden Dawn," and they'll show up and beat you up, kill you, whatever, because the violence was very real. At this time, one of the most important things the anti-fascists were up to was making the neighborhood of Exarchia kind of a safe place for immigrants and refugees, saying that if you enter Exarchia, the police can't mess with you. The Golden Dawn can't mess with you, because if the police comes, Molotovs will rain off the balconies. There's no point in going in. They'll just provoke a riot.
Yeah. I do think it's worth pointing out to our American audience just how little like Greek leftists fuck around. Like, we're not quite used to the level of intensity that y'all bring to the table.
Greek leftists are serious, and there's a history of radical leftism in Greece going back to the Civil War and before that, and of course we also have militant unions, but those kind of come in a little bit later in fighting the Nazis. But basically, Golden Dawn would sometimes attack Exarchia with, like, say, 50 guys with clubs and knives, and they would often be met with black bloc anti-fascists that would push them back. And often immigrants and refugees would often say that Exarchia was one of the safest places to be
Right.
in Athens. They Golden Dawn also tried to get into controlling labor unions in certain areas, like the dock workers unions, but they never really succeeded because the Communist Party has a really firm grip on syndicalist action in Greece, and a really firm grip on especially transportation unions, and uh, they really hold on to some, because union membership has fallen in Greece, and it's nowhere near as high as it is, say, in Sweden or Finland, where they have like 70% union membership. Greece has around 30%, which isn't low considering like America has 6%. But we the Communist Party and tends to hold some really strategic unions for strikes to be disruptive. So, say transportation, railways, dock workers. So stuff that can really put a halt to the Greek economy if need be. And yeah, so they Golden Dawn tried to get into controlling unions, but they didn't get too far. They, of course, yeah, they were coordinating to with the
Right.
police. Police, of course, long history of anti-communism and torture
Yeah.
of
So
left-wing
they
group.
were. So we're
Yeah,
in the uh,
20.
late
We're still in 2009 to 2011.
10.
It's that,
2009 to
yeah,
2011, we've made deliberate
yeah,
attempts to make friends with the police. The police have been natural allies of the Golden Dawn because of all the reasons
yeah.
that that would be true, and we are just at the point where they're starting to become a real political force. Is that kind of where we're at right now?
I think they really became a political force very quickly
Mm-hmm.
between 2009 and 2012. And really, in 2012, they ran for the Greek parliamentary elections on the slogan "to rid the land of filth."
Oh,
Very overtly, yeah, yeah, overtly Nazi.
and
Uh,
and they won how many?
of
How
course,
many?
they're
How much did they win on that slogan?
7%
Okay,
of the vote,
good,
which
good.
is yeah, if you win 7%, like you could easily enter a coalition government, if because like, say, like a good percentage for entering power is winning 35%
Mm.
in Greece,
Yeah,
because it is a multi-party system. And although there was a lot of two-party, like, going back and forth, one of the large parties collapsed, and that created a lot of turmoil. And nowadays there are a lot more parties. There's, like, the Communist Party has been around since forever, but they're not. They are anti getting into power. They're literally, their manifesto says that the only way we would ever enter power is through revolutionary action, which,
right there.
whatever.
Yeah, they're
If they manage to do a revolution for them, they're not, though, which is
yeah. So I think actually
sad.
it might be worthwhile to just spend a short amount of time discussing the Greek parliamentary system because that's going to be very important when we talk about numbers and
Yeah,
percentages of the votes and the seats. So in America, we have a first past the post voting system that's dominated by two political parties. And and what you need in our legislature is a simple majority, or increasingly a supermajority to of one party to get anything done,
yeah.
and that is not how it works in Greece. So, how does it work there?
No.
And
In Greece, we don't have a Senate. The we just have our parliament, 300 members of the parliament. And if they can run as members of political parties or get new political parties. If a party gets over 3% of the popular vote, they make it into parliament. They get the seats in parliament, and they can that party now has representation in parliament. So Golden Dawn getting 7% means they get around 7% of the seats in parliament.
Okay.
I think they got 16 seats
Okay.
of the 300.
So that is
Um,
getting to the point where you can start forming coalitions with other parties to actually make things
yes,
happen.
a I think in order for a party to gain like absolute power on its own, I think it needs to get over 40% of the
Mm-hmm.
vote uh, for it to form a government on its own. If it's lower than that, it will have to form a coalition government to reach 50% of the vote. It depends. There are differences in what kind of electoral law the left and the right pushes. I think that the left pushes for, like, if a party wants to be in the power on its own, it will need more than 50%. But the right pushes for reinforced representation, which means that if you get more than 40%, you get over 50% of the seats in parliament. So the amount of how each party is represented in for getting into parliament and what seats they will occupy, what just really is determined by popular vote, and whether they'll be in power is really determined by whether or not the large parties can form governments, and if they can't, they'll usually look to smaller parties to larger like create like larger coalitions
Okay.
that can get into power. And that was the main threat, really, of getting 7% of the vote. It means that the large conservative party now has a smaller party that they can potentially ally and coalition with. And the right wing knew that. They lots of politicians from New Democracy spoke about how really the Golden Dawn could be whipped into political shape. Uh,
Mm.
and at this time, it should be important to mention, at the time where they got into parliament, sure, they say rid the land of filth, but if they're asked directly, they will say no, we're not a neo-Nazi organization. Their usual party slogan is blood and honor, but no, we're not a neo-Nazi organization.
Right.
They deny the Holocaust in Parliament. No, we're not a neo-Nazi organization. So they openly deny being neo-Nazi organization. They drop the swastikas and take something that is as close to the swastika as they can get away with. I think you've seen
Yeah,
their
it's
low,
basically a
yeah,
swastika like turned sideways with a few extra curlicues. It's
yes. It's like it's tragic, but also like in some sense it's like it's funny like what they could get away with.
yeah. And I think
Really.
that is just an important takeaway for everybody who's listening. And it seems very simple, I think it's one of the reasons liberals are so vulnerable to fascist infiltration is, well, they say they're not Nazis, right? It's just this, for whatever reason,
Yeah.
the expectation that people are going to behave in good faith. Uh, and the fact of the matter is, sometimes bad people lie about their intentions. Um, and you can't always take people
Yes,
at their word, uh, particularly when they have a history of goose stepping and talking about ridding the world of filth.
of course. Yeah, it is really uh important to understand that they attempted to hide because they knew their optics were terrible. They knew that like they had this neo-Nazi past. They knew that a lot of their members literally had swastika tattoos on them. So we had members of parliament with swastika tattoos.
Dope.
It's pretty insane to contemplate.
Yeah. So, okay, we're
Yeah,
at 2012 and they've got 7% of the vote. Is that right?
2012. Yeah.
Okay.
So at this time they're growing really quickly, but there's also like the infiltration to in the police force. It also becomes really apparent because the main police directorate of Athens is in Kesariani. It's used to be a very red neighborhood. I don't know how much so ev- ever since, but there's a lot of police officers that stay around the police directorate, and the area of Kesariani, compared the areas around Kesariani pulled around 7-8% for Golden Dawn. Kesariani itself pulled 24% for Golden Dawn, which meant, like with some like crude calculations, we could tell that in order for that to happen, the around 5,000 police officers of the main police directorate would have to vote for around like 20 around like to get 25% in the end, and to offset the population voting for 7%, those police officers would have to do between 45 and 60% vote for Golden Dawn,
Excellent.
um,
Okay.
which is insane. Like,
Yeah,
yeah,
that's
almost half the police is Golden Dawn. Yeah,
now, was that
and
explicitly just in
especially
this
in the
one
right.
I'm sorry, was that explicitly just in this one neighborhood, or was that a phenomenon that was documented, like, elsewhere in the nation?
Pretty much every police pretty much every neighborhood with a police station had a higher uh
Okay.
Golden Dawn membership. They said that like countrywide, the voting intention of police officers ranged between 20 and 50% for Golden Dawn, but I think it's way more overt in that specific police directorate, the police director of Athens, because mainly because Athens sees most of the riots as well.
Right.
So the police officers in Athens are uh, a bit more hostile to lefties,
Gotcha. Okay.
um, so more likely to be friendly to Golden Dawn.
Okay.
Um, yeah, which is really terrifying. Now, over 2012, there was a huge escalation in violence. The Because there were a lot of protests. Often there were rallies for very large rallies for Golden Dawn. Um, and they would often be met with resistance from anti-fascists, and now the Communist Party, which was catching along and basically deploying like their syndicate power. There are some radical left unions in Greece, and mainly a union of unions, which is PAME, which is the All Workers Militant Front,
Mhm.
and which is an explicitly left wing slash communist like a union organization that often provides security for certain events. They and certain like strikes, so that the police can just break them. Um, they would often show up with clubs and fight Golden Dawn members in the street. And Now it was fairly useful that syndicalist members stepped in, because the anti-fascists, although they're really strong, there's not that many of them.
Mhm.
But syndicates, there's a lot of them. Like PAME, like all the entirety of the Golden Dawn voters were around 450,000 at its height in 2012. PAME, I think, has somewhere between four to 800,000 members. So on its own, it's a really large organization, and it could like provide muscle for certain events where and protect protesters from the Golden Dawn and the police.
Okay.
Um, and really, but so this growth and their time in parliament was extremely bizarre. They would deny the Holocaust in parliament. They would praise the former dictatorships of Greece and the former dictator Papadopoulos, who was the dictator of the junta. Uh, and I think it's also, I think, maybe important to talk about the media, uh, how they took Golden Dawn, and also um, their platform, what they ran on.
Okay. Where
Um,
are we in the timeline right
so
now? Are we still in 2012 or
still in 2012,
okay.
yeah, yeah,
All
yeah.
right. So media
Um,
and the Golden
uh,
Dawn's platform.
Yeah. So the interesting thing is that the media initially was fairly scant on like reporting on like Golden Dawn crimes, and instead kind of like focus a little bit too much um, on them as like media personalities. Oh, look at these wacky, uh,
Mhm.
you know, characters that are now in parliament that they say they're not neo-Nazis, but they look a lot like neo-Nazis. So there wasn't very strong like media, uh, wasn't a very strong media presence uh, in documenting what Golden Dawn was doing, and because the media doesn't really trust anti-fascists, it didn't really uh, mention like what was happening in neighborhoods where there was a lot of fighting between
Yeah.
uh,
Ain't
between
that a
anti-fascists. They often
ain't that a
mention
pain in the
violence on
ass?
both sides. Yeah, no, it's absolutely a pain
Yeah.
in the ass. Um,
Always
they
fun being Cassandra.
the yeah Yeah, no, it's really not great. It didn't have a lot of fun with media equating, the anti-fascists and anarchists to the Golden Dawn neo-Nazis.
Yeah. Yeah, we
But
don't
of
know what that's
course,
like over here at all.
yeah,
I have no point of comparison for that. I'm sorry. I can't relate.
yeah,
uh,
it
uh,
is.
yeah. So they're the media is not paying attention to all these people who are telling them, "Hey, there's a fucking problem here. You need to pay attention." Uh, and
Yeah, they're not really paying attention, but of course, um, as the as they got more radical, they opened way more offices around the country. There was suddenly violence across a lot of cities. There was a lot of beatings. Something was bound to go wrong for them optically. And once like more scrutiny was on them because they made it into parliament, and that really happened in 2013. There were some reports of murders happening like in immigrant neighborhoods, and refugees being killed, some illegal immigrants being killed. But of course you can't like police investigations into the killing of undocumented immigrants has never really been great.
right.
Um, and so it took really the murder of Pavlos Fissas for the beginning of the end for Golden Dawn. And it's terrifying to contemplate that they actually, no, I think we've kind of forgot to talk about like their platform. Um,
Yeah.
so they had a populist message. They talk about like economic relief to the poor Greek people. They had a nationalistic and expansionist foreign policy against Turkey and um, the countries, the Slavic countries on the north of Greece, Albania, and they were fairly. They were talking about birth rates a lot. Um, they were worried about uh, white replacement.
Hmm.
They um, but they were mostly like a populist message about like economic relief, exiting the European Union, and like closing the Greek borders and expelling immigrants, like and basically building up the nation, uh, like making the trains run, you
Right.
know,
Right.
stuff like that. Yeah, and sadly, that message like resonated with a lot of poor Greek people that were used to being fucked over by like the major economic powers that be the European Union, the IMF, the World Bank. They didn't like Greece being the economic crisis was really like catalytic for the growth of Golden Dawn membership because there was disillusionment as to the effectiveness of the mainstream parties. Thankfully, at the same time, another left party grew, Syriza, which is the coalition of the radical left. Um, they grew to a pretty large size, but Golden Dawn at this time had attracted a lot of nationalists, uh, And they didn't just attract neo-Nazis. Of course, they're a neo-Nazi organization, but the way they get into power is by attracting regular nationalists and some fascists, of course, that are just regular. Oh, I loved the times
Right.
of the junta were better. People like that. They gained a lot of, of course, the police, lots of voters there, and their families. And they basically, and a lot of poor people that had received help from the food drives and the blood drives and the food donations. So they were gaining like some sort of base of voters, and especially in more xenophobic parts of Greece, they also had a lot more voter representation in places that are like mostly white. There's nobody. They're just not cosmopolitan, you know.
Right.
Uh, but yeah, so that's kind of like what they ran on, and the economically populist message was also important in gaining a large group of following. So basically, they said that the decadent parties weren't able to deal with this crisis. We can do it. We will pull Greece out of this and bring it back to glory.
Yeah.
Kind of.
Just
Uh,
boilerplate fascist, like,
yeah.
yeah. Um,
Yes.
so their platform was effectively just the aggressive military expansionism and eradicating weakness
Yeah,
in
they
the
commented
homeland.
pretty
And
much. Yeah, yeah, pretty much. They commented on a lot of like border disputes and crises that happened in Greece, like the 2018 Mia crisis. They were advocating for like really radical measures there. There was, and of course, they talked about the Megali there, which is a Greek expansionist idea from the 30s about how Greece should own Eastern Thrace and the coast of Anatolia
Mhm.
in Turkey. Uh, they were pretty bad, I'd say, and exiting the European Union also. We're
Yeah,
anti-EU because the EU brought immigrants, of course.
right.
Um,
So that's the
yeah.
platform that they're running on. Is this, and they're slowly gaining a base of popular support from just rank and file conservatives who they've sort of made inroads with, and
Yeah.
the media is not really reporting on them as anything more than just a
It's
curiosity.
ambiguous,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. And where are we at right now, timeline wise?
So 2012, 2013, and really 2013 is when everything kind of goes south for them
Okay.
because uh they murdered Pavlos Fissas, who
Hmm.
was an anti-fascist rapper, fairly popular, and he wasn't like considered this crazy figure of the left. Yeah, he was an anti-fascist rapper, sure, but like he was kind of like the next door neighbor. He was
Hmm.
a man in his, I think, late 20s when he was murdered. And like the murder was shocking because Greece doesn't see a lot of murders. If there's a murder in Greece, it'll land on the news. uh there's around there's around like what, I think 30 or 40 murders a year.
Hmm.
Right. Yeah. Murder rate
Yeah, it's
Greece.
far,
Yeah, Greece is a very low. Yeah.
far less than here. Um, I
Oh
think that
yeah.
I think that's substantially less than the city that I live
So pretty much every murder will land on the news and it'll be a sensation for a week.
in. Hmm.
So when Pavlos Fyssas were murdered, immediately, like the media was on it, like questions, what is happening? Golden Dawn is like murdering people. There was a pretty high-ranking member of Golden Dawn as well that killed him. He was like one of the branch leaders of the Piraeus, of the port, like part of Athens. He was like the one of the leaders in that area. Like uh, it was the attack was supposedly directed from above. The How it went down, it was so Pavlos Fyssas and some of his friends were watching a football match, and they got into like a dispute with three Golden Dawn members that were near the bar. They One of the people present called the police. they didn't arrive very soon. Then the anti-fascists called for, sorry, the neo-Nazis called for backup. The Golden Dawn called for backup, and suddenly there were 30 Golden Dawn members with violent intentions. The FISA's group just tried to leave the area. The police arrived at this time, but there was really no action taken. The Golden Dawn started chasing them, and FISA's got separated from his group. And although police officers were present, and we do have some camera footage, which it was pieced together, it was seen that the officers really didn't interfere, and this regional leader pulled up with his car, got out, and stabbed Pavlos as he had been isolated from his group, and they basically left after that. The police was over there trying to help Pavlos to survive. And the police also asked the leader, what are you doing, the leader told the police at the time, when Rupakas was the murderer, he told the police that I am one of you, and the police said, what do you mean, are you a police officer? And he said, no, I'm Golden Dawn, which is a pretty immortal phrase in the modern history of Golden Dawn. It's no, I'm one of you, I'm Golden Dawn. And it really shows how much there was integration between the police and Golden Dawn. But of course, you can't just have a murder in public view and not get detained. And
one wonders what would have happened had that occurred in private.
Oh yeah, no, probably not that. It would have been a lesser deal. But of course, there was a massive public outcry. Pictures of FISA's being held by a partner while he's bleeding out went out on the news. Headlines about the violence of Golden Dawn, swift condemnation from all political parties. There was an investigation launched into what happened and how it happened, and the victim's mother, Magda FISA, a lot of her pictures grieving went around on the news. So it was really it was really apparent that Greek society was not okay with what had happened to Pavlos Fisas. And Golden Dawn went immediately on the defense, but that really wasn't enough. They said that we had nothing to do with this. Rupakas acted on his own, but of course, soon the big group of neo-Nazis was there. Lots of Golden Dawn presence. The connections of Rupakas to the leadership of Golden Dawn also surfaced, and at this time the Conservative Party that had even contemplated at some point to coalesce with Golden Dawn, they thought that okay, they are now an absolute optics nightmare, beyond any repair. So what we can do is launch a criminal investigation so that we can absolve ourselves and hopefully destroy their party and grab all of their conservative voters. Maybe not the neo-Nazi core of the party, but we can definitely skim off the top.
Mm-hmm.
And that's exactly what happened. The investigation wasn't going very quickly, but the defendant kind of held off and didn't go on their own to take down Golden Dawn or Rupakas on their own. There were other defendants, people that had been assaulted by Golden Dawn, people that, not defendants. I think those people to make the claim at, how do you call somebody who's filing the claims?
Prosecutor?
But
the prosecutor?
What?
The prosecutor is what we
not
the claimant.
Yeah, the claimant. Yeah, there were other claimants, not only the mother of Pavlos, but also the father of Shahshat Luhman, who was an immigrant that was murdered by Golden Dawn, that got way less publicity just a few months before. There were other people that have been assaulted, a group of fishermen, of Egyptian fishermen that had been assaulted and left for dead. was another group of syndicalists from PAME.
Hmm.
Yeah, actually, the syndicalist organization PAME immediately made the proclamation that uh, the the Golden Dawn are the Nazi lapdogs of capitalism, and we're here to smash them as we had done back in the 50s.
Nice.
And now they were like boomers, kind of uh, being extremely militantly anti Golden Dawn. And yeah, so now Golden Dawn had found much harder to be protected, not only by
Okay.
the police but the media, but pretty much
Okay.
everybody had a harder time defending Golden Dawn, and they had a harder time defending themselves. Keeping up the optics was hard. Pictures emerged of Golden Dawn members with their swastika tattoos and
Hmm.
the former meeting that happened in the 80s. Mihailo Yakos saluting in front of a swastika also
Right.
went around. That stuff isn't great. A lot of the leadership was arrested and held in pre-trial detention at this time over 2014. But you can only hold somebody in detention in Greece for 18 months.
Hmm.
You can't hold them longer unless you file charges. You
Right.
bring charges against them. You actually go to trial. So a lot of them were released in 2014-15, and they kept the party going. But at this time, they were in decline because they were growing rapidly over 2012-2013. But in 2015, in those elections, they got only around 7% again,
Okay. So
which means that they really didn't grow.
I think we what was the height of their popularity? What is the most that they got in an election percentage wise? Like, because coming
Seven
out of
percent in 2012, but they got 7% in 2012, 6.9% in June 2012 because there were two elections in
Mhm.
2012. Also in 2015 there were two elections because
Okay.
Greece likes to have a lot of elections.
Right. Um,
Basically, the parliament elections in 2014 they got 9.4% of the vote, but electorally parliamentary they were falling.
mhm.
Um, they But yeah, there were some internal polls that were never released that claimed that Golden Dawn was polling in late 2012 were polling up to 12 and 15%.
Okay.
But the media decided against publishing those polls, not to give them a boost.
Okay.
And
So they were
of course,
basically still on like a very rapid rise and trajectory prior to the murder of
yeah,
Pablo
but
Frisis, which it's been a while
yeah, yeah,
since I've read this book, and I may be misremembering it, but I think that the book Antifa, the Anti-Fascist Handbook, I want to say that that covers Pablo's murder in some detail, because I think that may have been where
no, really,
I might be misremembering it and confusing it with a different work. Maybe they just mentioned it in passing, but the book is basically just sort of an anthology of anti-fascist action for the past 50 years internationally, and I want to say that he spends some time, maybe 5 or so pages, talking about it in more detail. But it's a good book anyway. Um, so I want to make sure I'm kind of understanding how this is all playing out. So
yeah.
2012, we're at 7% of the vote. There's internal polls that say that they might be heading to like 12 or higher. They're very much on like kind of a meteoric rise, and
Meteoric.
then Pablo Frisis gets murdered publicly, and the media finally recognizes the party for what it is, and then there's sort of a
Yeah.
excuse me, they're sort of seen for what they are. People start peeling away. The conservative party starts trying to peel off their voters, and now we're in this period of decline where people are being prosecuted or at least
Yeah,
being held.
yeah, and of course the police investigation at this time, even though it was going slowly, was uncovering some pretty major things because the conservative government, even with all the infiltration of police, the conservative government really controlled their budgets. So if the conservative government wanted the police to do something, the police would do it.
Mm-hmm.
So they basically the investigations have covered certain legal activities I have here. So they hoarded guns. They were training paramilitaries in certain locations. They locally organized beatings and stabbings and violent pogroms against immigrant neighborhoods. They committed a lot of hate crimes against minority and LGBT members. They vandalized Jewish memorials. They were they engaged in a lot of beatings and attempted murders of leftist groups and trade unionists. They attempted murder. They attempted the murder of a lot of immigrants. They did immigrant checkpoints, checking papers in neighborhoods and kicking out immigrants and refugees. And of course, the murder of Pavlos Fyssas, which is pretty infamous.
So we're at the tail end of this period where they're being viewed by the media with scrutiny, and many of their upper echelon members are being jailed. What year are we at, and kind of what's going on now?
2013-14. Another thing in their strategy to kind of like fight this optically, they it is pretty widely accepted that two Golden Dawn members like were basically murdered by Golden Dawn itself, and they claimed to be and they claimed that a leftist group that has nobody has heard of ever since claimed responsibility, but we pretty much know that it was Golden Dawn. Never really confirmed, but they unleashed murals across all like a lot of offices of Golden Dawn, calling the two people that were murdered immortals.
Mm-hmm.
They were like two young members of Golden Dawn, and they basically tried to make it look like a war. Sort of. They said that they were being prosecuted for their beliefs and attacked, and that this had been an ongoing conflict like trying to equalize the sides, kind of. But it was really not. They were really not succeeding. The party was still run from the outside. The immigration crisis in 2014, 15, 16 really did also like maintain their power, because there was a lot of like refugees coming into Greece, and they were met with Golden Dawn violence. And but thankfully, like as the media scrutiny ramped up, as the investigation ramped up, and in 2015, a left-wing government comes into power, the Syriza government, and they ramp up the investigation very quickly, and the trial begins. The trial began in 2015, and using the discoveries of the police, like lots of terabytes of data about like Golden Dawn activities and documents. It was a really like strong case against them, and there were a few problems in like that stopped some institutional problems that stopped Golden Dawn from being investigated earlier. Apart from the slowness of the Greek judicial system, there are two laws that there was a law that slowed down things, which is the asylum law. You basically, if you want an MP to be prosecuted for illegal activities, they have to this has to be voted on by the parliament in like a supermajority. Which means that they have immunity from persecution until the parliament says so, and the parliament never says so.
Right.
Like to get 60% of the parliament to agree, like on an MP to be prosecuted, they literally need to murder somebody in broad daylight,
Right.
which is it's really difficult. Like it's a law that like lets you get away with a lot of stuff. And there's also a law against political persecution, which says that you can't persecute a political party for their ideology, for their beliefs. And the main purpose of that law was to protect leftist parties in Greece after the junta, because every time a right wing or a dictatorial regime comes on, like they turn the police and the military on the illegal left parties, on the like anti-patriots sort of the left. So this law was meant to like finalize the legalization of the KKE, and which is the Communist Party of Greece, and also to protect um, you know leftist parties. But of course, it also worked with Golden Dawn, and so you couldn't persecute them for their beliefs, and you couldn't persecute them in general because they were in parliament. So the way they went about it is that they claimed that Golden Dawn was an organized crime ring that was masquerading as a political party.
Okay.
And organized crime is one of the things that you can get persecuted for while in parliament. And it was like with all the things they did, it wasn't hard to claim that they were an organized crime ring, because they did hoard weapons, like attack people, like made like certain people pay for protection. Uh, they were selling protection. They were like attacking certain neighborhoods and picking turf fights with anti-fascists. So it was really easy to claim that they were an organization that were like a mafia. They were very hierarchical in their leadership of the party and very dogmatic. So that did work against them, and as the trial ramped up, really the Golden Dawn started like disintegrating. Like lots of their members fled to other parties. Like the violence started like dropping, with the police being a little bit more hostile to Golden Dawn. Um, the media was more hostile. And as more evidence started gathering, it was becoming increasingly difficult to back up the Golden Dawn. Something that I should also point out is that they denied um, the they denied that people were murdered in the 17th of November uprising in 1973. This is like you know a lot of Americans say that the Civil War was about states' rights.
Right.
It's something similar, but way closer and way more overt. So people in the Greek right, the far right, the Greek far right, they claim that during a November uprising in the Polytechnic University of Athens in 1973 against the junta, that happened between the I think the 14th and the 17th of November. It was a 3-day uprising of students. Like they barricaded themselves in the university, and they broadcasted like down with the junta, out with NATO, like down with like bread, peace, and liberty. Um, and the junta decided to violently put it down because it seemed that they wouldn't just stop. Um, so they sent tanks down to the university. They put up like snipers around the buildings, and they killed a lot of people. Like the my father's best friend was the first victim of the of the of the police. He was murdered by I think a police officer during that time, and he's a really famous victim actually.
Right.
I think Diomedes Comnenus was his name. But basically, like the tanks on the 17th, the tanks rolled over the gates of the university, and they crushed a lot of people that were holding onto the gates. And those pictures and moments have been immortalized in Greek history. And if you claim that that nobody was murdered in the Polytechnic, that's a mask off moment.
Right.
You're basically saying that, yeah, the junta was good.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like denying the Holocaust for Greeks, kind of.
Right.
It's not comparable of severity, but in like as a trigger,
Mm-hmm.
I'd say it is. And yeah, so that denial of theirs also was really hard on their popularity, because there's a lot of students, like ever since the fall of the junta, the Polytechnic uprising is a holiday off for
Mm-hmm.
Greek students, and they also make a it's a purely anti-fascist holiday. Lots of songs are being sung about like how fascism won't pass,
Mm-hmm.
and the like memorialize like the bravery of the students that died uh, on that day. And it's really hard a pill to swallow that nobody died during the Polytechnic,
Yeah.
considering that a lot of people in their 60s literally remember it.
Yeah.
you know,
I think
literally remember it on.
Yeah, I think I was actually in Athens during one of those celebrations once, and it was that like the whole country just like comes out and celebrates.
Yes.
It to openly deny that event that is in the living memory of so many people is very much a
Yes.
like it's just, I mean, aside from just being
And it's
horrible, it's an
yeah,
optics nightmare. Like it's political suicide in that
yeah,
country.
it is absolutely. Yeah, it is. It basically relegates you to only far right support, because like even normal conservatives like do know that people died in the Polytechnic. Like it's really hard to be taken seriously after you deny that.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, it's a major anti-fascist holiday for Greek students and people. There's like at school, I remember, putting on like school shows about the students every 17th.
Mm-hmm.
It is a really big thing in Greece, and there's a lot of protests every time, and against police brutality, against authoritarianism. In general, it's a really important holiday to a lot of Greeks. And yeah, the that's I think that's a bit of a tangent, but honestly, during this time, like in 2016, 17, the party was really just disintegrating, and as the trial was wrapping up, there were some like terrifying like parts. There were the trial had 69 defendants.
Mm-hmm.
Was the largest trial of Nazis since Nuremberg.
Hmm.
Um, and yeah, um, and there were some problems with like prosecutorial leniency. The prosecutor was sadly like Adamantia Economou. She was extremely lenient. She claimed her first recommendation was that like only the murderer should be held in like and persecuted, that he was unconnected to Golden Dawn. Then but thankfully like she also like she recommended leniency at pretty much every step of the process, but in the end like the judges rejected her calls for leniency. um and the trial was wrapping up. They were tried under article 187, which is like running a criminal organization.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so as the trial was ended in October 2020. So it's a really close event, and they were indeed declared a criminal organization. In 2019, they fell out of parliament. They got only 2.9% of the vote,
Okay.
2.7, which is under the 3% threshold to enter parliament, which was also a cause for celebration
Mm-hmm.
across Greece. Um, and yeah, thankfully they got basically like a very close to maximum sentences for their crimes, which is like Michalogliakos got 14 years.
Mm-hmm.
13 years for running a criminal organization and 1 year for weapons charges. The rest of the high leadership got 13 years. Um, and everybody else got between 7 and 12 years. Like it was pretty devastating to the party, and that's really what has like the Golden Dawn offices closed. Um, and yeah, the problem is that a lot of their voters went off to join other parties, and the Conservatives won the 2019 elections. Uh, like the number two spokesperson for Golden Dawn, like a pretty like overtly neo-Nazi guy, started a party uh, called Greeks for the Fatherland,
Oh, subtle.
which he started from prison. The funny thing is though that the acronym, which is Greeks GTP, is it's also another acronym that Greeks use as an insult that something is terrible. GTP would mean like the direct translation is for the dick, but I think you understand.
Yeah,
It's like shitty, something that is
right.
shitty. You would call GTP. So that party won't take off because everybody says it that it's GTP, which is their,
Nice.
which is thankfully that party won't take off. There's another party called the Greek Solution, uh,
Again,
also
subtle.
pretty overt.
Very
Yeah, they are
subtle.
in parliament now with. Yeah, they're in parliament now with 4% of the vote.
Good.
They
Yeah.
they're not as explicitly neo-Nazi. They brand themselves as an orthodox and nationalist organization. Um, they are more careful in their advocacy so they don't get golden dawned. Uh,
Right. Which I
yeah,
think
and
that might be like the central lesson here is like one of the main reason it seems that the Golden Dawn Party fell apart was because they were dumb and they didn't understand optics or
yeah,
subtlety or
they couldn't keep it in their pants. Yeah,
yeah, which everybody around them was watching and taking notes, and the next time this happens, I mean, you look at, for instance, the more subtle variants that are propping up in your country, or say, for instance, the Proud Boys or the MAGA movement in my country.
yeah,
I mean, all you have to do in many instances is just not play your cards too soon. And it's very easy
yes,
to
they are.
grow a
Really, it's a game of optics with fascist movements. That's usually their biggest problem because they are really belligerent and racist. It's really hard for them to be optically like salient for political like power. And in Greece, they were even though they were so overt, like the conditions within Greece allowed for their growth,
Mhm.
but because they were just too eager to commit crimes, they were like the legal hammer was brought down on them hard, and basically like uh, after the murder of Pavlos Physis, the Greek society kind of like violently rejected the continued growth of Golden Dawn. Their decline was slow, sure, but it was a sure decline after that. But if they kept clear of like say quoting the protocols of the elders of Zion in parliament and denying the Holocaust and like slapping communist MPs on TV and
Mhm.
doing like some crazy optically terrible stunts, apart from like the murders and the denying the 17th of November killings, like saying like they also said that like we forgive Hitler for invading Greece. Like stuff like that was terrible for their optics.
Right.
Like absolutely garbage. Made them look so bad.
Yeah, I listened to this story, and the one thing that I'm reminded of is that fascist movements, by definition, will eventually burn themselves out and fail, right? It's not self-sustainable like it is a
Yeah,
death cult. The problem is the harm that is done along the way. Uh, but
yeah.
other, like, what lessons do we draw from this for the people who are fighting fascist movements abroad, other than liberals should occasionally listen to anti-fascists when they tell them there's a fascism happening.
Yeah, I'd say that the most important lessons is to understand that in pretty much every like large economic crisis, like fascist movements will be ready to capitalize. So like as a country, you should always push for progressive economics, like taking care of like the poorest people in your society, because you don't want fascists taking care of them. That's
Okay.
the wrong thing to happen. And Also, populism is a double-edged sword. Yeah, sure, it's dumb. It's like a lot of the time, like it can be used for by right wingers, but also if you don't use it, if you're unable to use like smart popular politics, you will lose eventually when things are tough and you don't like reciprocate the anger of the popular anger towards government.
Mm-hmm.
um so you like any movement, liberal movement, like left movement, needs to know how to play popular politics without necessarily being like stupid lowbrow populist. You can do popular politics, like you can use populism to your advantage and be wary when your opponents use populism against you, because it's a really powerful tool in times of crisis.
Right.
So that is also really important. And sadly, in order to make people listen to us, when we're threat like when we're saying, oh, they're doing a fascism, we need to point out clear cases of like racism and discrimination, because that doesn't really fly in liberal circles at all. And we also need to point out crimes. And thankfully, fascist movements are dumb and they're really belligerent. So they will eventually do something criminal, or like engage in beatings. And it's good to have a camera ready to film, like, when the Proud Boys like beat a queer person like nearly to death.
Yeah. I mean,
Uh,
unfortunately,
because
we've
that's
done
how you
that.
kill their optics.
I just part of me is it's hard for me not to be pessimistic when I've sat and watched the like in
It's
my own country.
understandable. Yeah.
Um, just the I know a lot of people who suddenly took the MAGA threat very seriously on November or on January 7th, and had always taken
Oh
it very
God.
seriously on January 7th, despite the fact that they were poo-pooing and downplaying the idea of, the fragility of our institutions and the fact that a lot of us were calling attention to the fact that there was an incipient fascist movement growing in our country that almost succeeded
Mm.
by a few million less votes for Biden, and the Republican Party, the establishment Republicans very well might have extended legitimacy to his claims of electoral fraud. Like a few nails, one direction or another, and we could have gone down a very dark road. And I just wonder, how do we get these people to listen to us when we say that, like, let alone,
Yeah.
I don't know if I don't know. I want to end on an
I think,
optimistic note, but
yeah,
what can we do?
it's difficult, really, but I think that like receipts of like violent action
Hmm.
are really important. And of course, like trying to educate people on like differentiating between, like, actually not differentiating, but like understanding that a fascism, like a movement, doesn't become fascist when it's in power. It
Hmm.
becomes fascist way earlier. And you need to, like, if you're arguing with somebody who's like not understanding, like how um a movement is fascist, don't directly point out similarities between, say, them and fascist Italy or Nazi Germany, because they will immediately think you're like being hyperbolic.
Mhm.
What you should do is encourage them to think, okay, you might think I'm hyperbolic calling them fascist. That's understandable. Can you describe to me what, not what, not examples of fascist movements, because anybody can say Hitler's Germany. Can you describe to me what makes a movement fascist? And tell me if I'm applying those tenets wrong. Don't tell me like that Nazi Germany and fascist Italy were fascist. We know that. Oh, everybody knows that. But what made them fascist? What were the specific things they were doing that made them fascist? And then you might be able to break through, because like I think that anybody can identify like the extreme nationalism. And something that will often click is talking about how, you know, how a how fascist movements think that their country was once great and now is being destroyed by immigrants. In the case of America, the
Mhm.
Mexican immigrants or whatever, and then or some inside group LGBT, whatever
Mhm.
it may be, and then that the country needs to return to its glorious times. So it's good to point out like similarities, but not directly and not immediately. Try to prompt people into thinking about like how um, how a movement can be categorized as fascist, and also try to explain why like belligerence or autocratic tendencies alone don't make a fascist.
Mhm.
Like a fascist is something, even though it's hard to define, it's pretty distinguishable from
Yeah.
like just plain old authoritarianism. Something that is also pretty important, I'd say, is to not accelerate. Because there's a lot of talk. There was a lot of talk of accelerationism in Bernie circles and Bernie or
Mhm.
busting, during the 2020 election. And it's pretty depressing having to pick the lesser of two evils. But in order to engage in like revolutionary action, in order to like actually like challenge the institutions by abstaining or and not fall to fascism, well, you need to have a really, really strong backing, not popular backing of your movement, a really strong like on the ground level institution. Like Greece, for example, we have PAME, we have like a syndicalist, like communist union, uh, like union of unions that
Mhm.
kind of like mobilizes workers. We have
Right.
30% union membership. America only has 6% union membership.
Yeah.
If America accelerated, if American leftists accelerated, I don't know how if they're powerful enough to actually sway these whole elections, but if they manage to like actually succeed in getting somebody worse to lead the country, fascism would come way before a leftist popular uprising came up, way
Yeah.
before.
No,
So
we would absolutely
for the
like the left in the
right,
United
don't
States is not
accelerate.
ready for that in any way. Um,
Yes,
and
yes,
the number of leftists who think that they're ready for that is alarming. Um, so that is
yeah.
I think that irrespective of anything else, we should be working towards building dual power in our communities. And I'll link the evergreen thread from Black Socialists in America on doing that in the show notes, um, as a good introduction for that. But the distinction that you made about authoritarianism is, I think, an important one,
Hmm.
because fascists are not obligate dictators. They will use whatever mechanism is
Yeah.
the easiest for them to use to gain and wield power for their agenda. If that is electoralism, they'll use electoralism. If electoralism is no longer working for them, they will use other means. But just because it's an official political party that's registered in your government, it doesn't mean it's not a fascist party, because that might just be the
Yeah,
easiest way for them to operate. Um, so yeah,
exactly.
that's a very good point.
And yeah, I mean, authoritarianism and like dictatorial power has been older than pretty much like way older than fascism in itself. Absolute monarchs existed, way before fascists existed, but like the whole mentality was different. Like it was about maintaining, the kingdom, not going out in a blaze of glory,
Right.
or talking about how the kingdom was one great. What are you talking about? The kingdom is great. It
Right.
never ceased to be great. Yeah, but
Yeah.
no, fascists will tell you we were once great. Now we are decadent and destroyed because of X minority, or because of X political movement, or because of whatever it may be, because of our lack of moral foundation. They'll say anything.
Yeah. I think I
Yeah.
think another useful thing to do is to highlight, and I am no fan of conservatism, but I think it is a useful
Sure.
tool to highlight the difference between general bog standard conservatism and fascism, because it has been said that conservatism can be thought of as like diet fascism, but I think it's more instructive to think of fascism as conservatism with no brakes, all gas. It's what happens when conservatism completely loses its moral center such that it had one to begin with. Like it's just conservatism in death
Yeah.
cult mode. And if you can point out the difference between those two ideologies, not just to a liberal, but to a
I'd say
conservative, that is a
yeah.
useful thing to be able to do.
I'd say one of the most useful ones is you know again comes in the idea of like that we were once great and now we're decaying. Um, a lot of conservatives are nationalistic. Sure, they say that their country is the best in the world, but like you can tell them that listen, like you think that your country is the best in the world, but it wasn't better back then, or like you might have rosy tinted glasses of your early childhood, but like they won't say, like a lot of like conservatives won't say that the country's collapsing. They might say that we're stronger than ever, or they might
Mm-hmm.
say that you know whatever. That's one thing. Like they don't necessarily subscribe to the idea that the country was once great but now is just being destroyed. Sadly, a lot of them were moved on that by Trump. Uh,
Yeah.
the there's they tend to be traditionalist, but not to an extreme. Uh, like they like some conservatives are a bit more respectful of the rights of women and sometimes the rights of minorities. Um, and like you might get them to be concerned with like some conservatives are also like have a different idea of like what economics should be, and some conservatives are also anti-populist,
Mm-hmm.
which is not necessarily true for like fascists. But sadly, the distinction is thin.
Yeah.
Um, really, like you can point to some differences, but really, it's fascist. Conservatism supercharged. Really, is uh,
Mm-hmm.
what
One of
fascism. And yeah, I think the biggest one, if I had to point to one thing, would be subscribing to the narrative of a once great country that is falling apart.
yeah. And I think
That
that's
that is a to distinct,
yeah.
yeah,
It's
to
a
distinguish.
big point of distinction, and it's also what makes, I think, American conservatism acutely vulnerable to falling into fascism, because all you really have to do to take an American conservative and make them a fascist is introduce them to reality, right? Because we have the mythology that we are the greatest nation on the planet. We are the best
Yeah.
everywhere, anywhere, at everything. And once you introduce them to the fact that we have shitty infrastructure and poor health care, and the only thing we're really good at is building bombs to ship to people to liquidate people that are darker than khaki. Like, if you introduce them to the reality of the fact that America is not actually the greatest country in the world, you've already taken 3 steps in the direction of making a fascist.
Yes. Also, something that is pretty interesting when looking at the United States from a foreigner's perspective. It was always crazy to me how overt your displays of patriotism have always been. Like, you will never find a Greek person wearing a, like an American, like a Greek flag tuxedo, or a
Mm-hmm.
Greek flag underpants, or like have the Greek flag flying at all times in their house, or confuse the words nationalism and patriotism. Because in the United States, if you say you're a patriot, usually these people aren't just nationalists.
Mm-hmm.
I think that in Greece we make a really strong distinction between patriot and nationalist, but that doesn't really exist in the United States.
Not
In
at
Greece,
all.
you say a patriot just like loves, yeah, love a patriot loves the country, like likes the place they grew up in and the culture surrounding Greece, and want to see Greece like improve and like succeed and become economically more prosperous. That you would call that person a patriot. If like you would distinguish it with a nationalist, because a nationalist thinks that Greece is the greatest country on earth, for example, that would make them a nationalist. But I've never seen a person in the United States distinguish between patriot and nationalist, and that is also a problem, because here in Greece, like we're already like any person that is left leaning will immediately be suspicious of somebody flying the Greek flag all the time when it's not a national celebration, or flying the Greek flag on their balcony when there is no national celebration. We'll say, okay, that person is either extremely conservative or an ethno nationalist,
Mm-hmm.
because we immediately, like, we are trained to recognize somebody who uses the flag a little too much. But the United States, the flag is everywhere, and you also have like the Pledge of Allegiance in schools, which is also completely insane to me from being outside of the United States.
Yeah, no, no,
Pledging allegiance to the state.
no
What?
argument here. No, that's
That is insane.
it is absolutely bonkers. The And we do mythologize our history as well. If you like, I would actually
That
encourage
too. Yeah.
you, and I would encourage anybody who is not an American to find a copy of a 6th grade American history textbook published in the United States and just read through it with your friends.
Oh, I
Um,
would love to see that. Yeah.
it is one of the most, like, I would expect that it's only like 5 to 10 degrees of crazy away from the sort of stuff that you would have found in like an actual uber nationalist fascist government's education system. Like, it's the founding fathers are these godlike figures who are infallible, and where they are fallible, it's because of divine providence. And we some bad
I
things
mean,
may have
Trump
happened,
wanted
but
to, right?
it basically reads like the foundation myth of Rome. Like, it's really, really
Yeah.
it's deeply fucked up. Um, so we're already kind of
And
predisposed to that type of thinking, just by cultural osmosis.
yeah, and I think it's also, if I had to give an instruction to, like, say, more liberal governments, a lot of the time, populist movements are seen with scorn, specifically because a lot of liberals realize that populism is also kind of a right wing thing, and a lot of the time the economic prescriptions of movements like that aren't great. But you need to play the game. You can't abstain from that game, from the populism game. You have to be able to have a popular economic agenda that you can run on, instead of and not openly mock the people that engage in economic populism, because that works against you, because then you look like the elitist that they are fighting. You need you don't have to fall into that trap. You can get away from it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know what else we could
Well,
talk about now.
I th-
Sadly,
yeah,
there's it's more noisy now.
that's fine.
Yeah.
I think uh ending on a positive note of that we can we can get away from it if we try is a good note to end on. We'll call that an optimistic. I like to end on a happy note. So we'll do three our three ending questions, which we like to do here is number one, self-promotion. Tell
Sure.
everybody who you are, where they can find you, and all that good stuff.
Right. So you can find me at this time on Twitter. I go by Richard Hannay. Richard, as you hear it, Richard. That spelling, and Hannay's Hannay. And you can find me on Twitter. Now I have around 700 followers. It's pretty great. I post once in a while about history and politics. And I now that I finished university and I have a bit more time, I have my bachelor's degree. I'm thinking of actually starting maybe a channel or a Twitch stream where I'll be talking about politics and history and bringing examples that are useful from history to understand modern political phenomena, which I think is
Sweet.
kind of lacking. There's not that many military historians on the left. Um, you won't find a lot of them. Most of them go into the armed forces directly afterwards.
Yeah.
Um, I think that's yeah. Find Follow me on Twitter. It's,
Okay. And we'll look
I
forward
really
to the Twitch stream or the YouTube channel whenever that comes out. I will definitely subscribe
sure.
and encourage everybody else to as well. So number two, we've done self-promotion. Uh,
Hmm?
who out there, other than the people that we've mentioned, are content creators or people that you follow that you think other people should? And I know that one of them that we wanted to give a shout out to is Cosmo Jenkins. And we'll give that as a
Yes,
freebie.
yes.
Everybody go check out Cosmo Jenkins.
Yep.
And then anybody else
Yeah,
that you want to.
he has a left comedy channel, which is actually like a lot of fun. I've watched a lot of his videos. So really
And
great.
anybody else out there that you're paying attention to right now that people should check out?
I'd say although I don't the channels that I tend to watch are pretty large. I would point people to a documentary called Golden Dawn: A Personal Affair, which I think gives a lot of information on Golden Dawn and a lot of overview. It's made by an anti-fascist journalist and investigator. It's really good. Um, it does end in 2017 as a timeline, but it does really like show the growth of Golden Dawn very clearly. And yeah, I'd say that. Yeah.
Okay. Good. And then lastly, what is a piece of media? It could be anything, book,
Mm.
movie, anime, whatever you're into that you think people might not have read or been exposed to that you think they should go check out.
Okay. Since I'm a history student, I'll recommend history graduate. I'll recommend two history books. I'll
Okay.
recommend Mark Mazur's The Dark Continent,
Okay.
which is really excellent for understanding really the 20th century in Europe and the rise of fascism. And also, if anybody's more interested in Greek political history, I'd suggest reading The Origins of the Greek Civil War by David Close. It's I think the roots of the Civil War. I have it in Greek, so I'm not sure of the title. Um, it's a really great book for understanding how the Greek Civil War happened, and I would really look forward to actually talk with you about the Greek Civil War, since it's the
Yes.
topic of my dissertation.
Yes. I am going
Maybe sometime
to... Yeah, no, I definitely want to have you back on to do just that. And we will, I've got, I think, like 3 or 4 guests lined up in the next couple months, and then I'm moving, but I definitely want to get you back on in the next few months to talk about that.
Sure. Yeah,
Because
we'll talk about it. Yeah.
Okay. So I'll get up with you on the DMs after that, but we'll call it a we'll call it a podcast, man. That was super fun. Thank you for coming back on. I appreciate it. All right. I'll talk to you later.
It's a pleasure.